Welcome, students. Today we are going to talk about metaphysical poetry. In our previous classes, we have already discussed a lot about the syllabus of civil services main and also about Renaissance and Reformation that constitute a part of that syllabus. Our next topic is metaphysical poetry directly because we are just proceeding according to the syllabus prescribed for civil services main exam, particularly UPSC. So in this lecture, we will mention metaphysical poetry and will also include certain example with reference to the text prescribed in our syllabus. We have already John Donne as the poet prescribed in our syllabus and 4-5 texts written by him. So let's start metaphysical poetry. Actually, if we directly consider metaphysical poetry, that will just make the entire disturb the continuity of the discussion, because this is a topic of history of English literature. We have already talked about the Renaissance and Reformation poetry and drama. We have already talked about Spenser as the greatest poet of Renaissance, and we have already talked about Shakespeare as the greatest dramatist. Spenser is not mentioned in our syllabus while Shakespeare is there. So we are supposed to just link the thread between the other trends of poetry written during that period and the metaphysical poetry. So before doing that, we are supposed to know the basics of metaphysical poetry. Actually, earlier the term was used in pejorative sense. William Drummond William Drummond was the first to use this term. He said that these poets use metaphysical ideas and scholastical quiddities in their poems. So, of course, the phrasing, the tone is pejorative, derogatory, you can say. He used this term in his a letter which is undated. Then we have Dryden, who also conveyed the same opinion and accused John Donne of perplexing the mind of the fair sex fair sex means women, with philosophical speculations. So he was also the same opinion. Then we have Samuel Johnson. In his Life of Cowley, he presented his study on metaphysical poets and he gave his opinion that these poets are men of learning in general and their main aim was to show their learning. Their prime aim was to show their learning. So the prima facie, it appears that Samuel Johnson was also of the same opinion. But modern researches show that Samuel Johnson was very well read in metaphysical poetry and he only criticized certain extreme aspects, extreme traits of Cowley and his contemporaries, metaphysical poets in a way. But at the same time, he also appreciated their certain qualities and he quoted them widely in his dictionary. So we cannot say that he entirely used the term in pejorative way. But he showed, he thought, he opined that they were uh, just writing to show their intellectual qualities, intellectual strength. In a way, according to Samuel Johnson, these poets, the poets belonging to metaphysical school of poetry, were interested in introducing a kind of intellectual strain in their poetry. But if we talk about intellectual and philosophical strain, we cannot leave Chapman. If we go through his poems, we will find that going by the opinion of Samuel Johnson, Chapman should be the first member of this school, because we can easily find the philosophical and intellectual strain in his poetry as well, in his dramas as well. So all these are subjective things. Actually, in the 20th century, the opinion about metaphysical poets changed entirely, and the main role in changing that opinion was played by an authority, T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot, you must have heard his name, and you must have read some of his poems as well, because being a student of English literature. So T.S. Eliot was looking for a proper medium for his poetic works, and he found a model in the metaphysical poets and the French symbolists. So he was of the opinion that these poets were much better than their other contemporaries or successors. So he was of the opinion that metaphysical poets, and particularly John Donne, had a kind of unified sensibility, a kind of unified sensibility. F.R. Lewis also admired metaphysical poets. In a way, he supported the same opinion. So these were the things that changed the entire idea about metaphysical poets, and the term was used earlier in a pejorative way, is now used with admiration and you can say even awe, because it was surprising for many people to create that kind of sensibility during that period, when most of the poets, most of the writers were engrossed themselves, uh, most of the writers engrossed themselves in creating, composing lyrical poems. Now, we are also supposed to have an idea of the basic characteristics of metaphysical poetry that gave these poets and their poetry, their works, a distinctive identity. So here we will mainly focus on uh, the works of John Donne, though we will mention the qualities that were shared by most of the metaphysical poets. First is dramatic and colloquial opening. Dramatic and colloquial opening. Generally, the purpose was to shock the reader, and then, with sustained argument, they were able to sustain their attention as well. The dramatic opening means you will find that the narrator of the poem is addressing someone or speaking to someone. For example, hold your tongue and let me love. This is the opening of a poem written by Donne. And this shocking and dramatic opening is found even in the poems of George Herbert, in some of the poems of Marvell. You can just find these things commonly in most of the metaphysical poets. So, and you can also notice in the opening line the colloquial tone, hold your tongue and let me love. This is simply colloquial language. So this was one peculiar quality of metaphysical poets. Then we have much talked about metaphysical conceits. Actually, conceits are, generally speaking, extended metaphors, and it was not new to English literature. While they started writing, these metaphysical poets started writing, these literary devices were already used in Petrarchan sonnets and they were quite in fashion. But by the time these poets, metaphysical poets, started writing, this literary device became quite stale. They reached their putrescence. They lost their uh, innovative, novel qualities. So these poets gave them a new energy. This, and that's why the conceits began to be called metaphysical conceits as distinctive from Petrarchan conceits. In these conceits, remotest of the things, heterogeneous things or ideas were compared and a meaning is attempted to be hammered out of them. So we can take for example uh, the two lovers compared with the twin lakes of compass in the poems of in a poem of John Donne. We can have the undergarments of women compared with uh, just male organs. All these things are a strange type of comparison can be found there. And we have uh, flea. We have a flea compared with the blood of flea compared with the consummate love. All these things are there. We can find John Donne addressing his mistress as, oh my sweet America. Here he is comparing his mistress with the newly found continent of America. All these things are prima facie strange and very odd, very shocking to the new reader, to the beginners. But they give a meaning and they give a deeper meaning. So, this metaphysical conceits in the skillful hands of Donne and Herbert becomes an advantage. But as was the case with Petrarchan conceits, it generally degenerated into only voluptuous show off of the language in the hands of later followers of metaphysical poets, means in the hands of Cole and Crashaw, all these poets. So, our next point will be sustained argument. When they were able to shock the reader into their poem, they began to argument to justify their point, and thus the attention of the reader is sustained all through the poem, and theme of the poem keeps unfolding gradually. And finally, we have a substantiated conclusion. You can say justification to their point. So these are some of the peculiar traits of metaphysical poets. Now, our question should be, what was the reason that led these poets to break away with the tradition, and whether they really broke away with the tradition? So, in terms of language, in terms of presentation of their themes, in terms of even their thematic preoccupation, they certainly broke away with the tradition to a certain extent. But if we remember the line of the essay of T.S. Eliot, you can say, sorry for that, I just said line of T.S. Eliot, but essay of T.S. Eliot in tradition and the individual talent, we can say that no poet or no school of poetry can completely seen in terms of breaking away with the tradition in which they are writing. Here we have to go a little deeper to see what was the condition and why they appear so dissimilar with the other poets of their period. They were writing in a period when just uh, before them Spencer was there. He is supposed to be undoubtedly the greatest Renaissance poet, and he created a tradition which was followed by his immediate successors. And in our previous lectures, we have already talked about what kind of thematic preoccupation was there in the poems of Spencer. We have humanism, we have geographical discoveries, we have Neoplatonism, we have love for history, local history, national history, we have love for classical literature, and derived from the love for history, we have a patriotic impulse. And Spencer was able to synthesize all these different strands, and he was able to express them into different forms, and he was also able to combine those different forms in single poems. We can take, for example, Fairy Queen. It's a great masterpiece. We have history there, we have mythology there, we have allegory there, we have a sense of patriotism there. So we have a strain of didacticism there. All these things are combined into one. This efficiency was lacking in his successors, and mostly they could express their patriotic impulse, and out of that they expressed their love for English history, love for English mythology, and they also brought out an element of didacticism in their writing. So there were many successors and contemporaries of Spencer who just pick one or two strands of these different threads and they expressed them, these strands, in their poems. The result was not as happy as that in the hands of Spencer. It was obvious. But one thing was clear, that the constant experimentation in the early period of Tudor reign, means the early Tudor poets, resulted into the hammering out of a good and excellent, a beautiful lyrical tradition in England, in English poems. So, towards the heyday of Elizabethan period, we can find a mellifluous, a melodious lyric being composed by different writers, and these melodious poems, melodious lyrics can be found in different songbooks, different dramas of Shakespeare and Ben Jonson. We can find them in the works of Thomas Lawes, Nash. We can find them in interspersed in Sydney's Arcadia. But this lyrical tradition found its consummation, its zenith, in the hands of Shakespeare, in the sonnet sequence of Shakespeare, and in one symbolic poem, if we have to name, the Phoenix and the Turtle, written by Shakespeare. The musical quality, the melodious quality, the mellifluous quality found its zenith in these works, in the sonnets of Shakespeare, in this symbolic poem. And parallel with that, we have a different kind of trend, and that was mainly in terms of the use of language. The writer, the poets Ben Jonson and Donne, in a way, they did not follow the use of language the way it was used before them. They deviated in that term, and to that extent, they can also be called to break away with the tradition. They used language to convey the sense and not to please the ears. Actually, the lyrical tradition had achieved its presence, its rightness, and it was becoming repetitive. Its main purpose was to please the ears of the reader and not to directly appeal to the mind. These writers used language in a new way so that they can appeal to the mind of the reader. They were not concerned with enchanting the ears of the readers. Means they were not concerned with your acoustics. They were concerned with your striking to the mind, striking direct into the mind. So here we have Ben Jonson. He was only concerned with the neatness of form, neatness of expression. He followed the classical tradition. John Donne was still different even from Ben Jonson. Though there are certain traits that can be found in each other. Some of the traits of Ben Jonson can be found in John Donne. Some of the traits of John Donne can also be found in Ben Jonson. And that is why the later followers of John Donne and the later followers of Ben Jonson can be mistaken to be the followers of the others one. You can say, am I making sense to you? Means there were certain traits of these two schools established by these two masters had certain similarities. Means they shared certain similarities in terms of their works. Still, there were enough distinctive qualities to give them distinctive identity. So that was all about the development of metaphysical poetry. Here we have one question. We have seen the development from Spencer to John Donne, but why writing in the same circumstances, same situations? Because there were not much difference in the social milieu, in the cultural and political and religious condition during the period of Spencer and during the period of John Donne. Still, there are much differences in their poetic school, poetic expression. So, the individuality of John Donne and his followers must have must have been a factor in giving them a distinctive quality. So here we are primarily focusing on John Donne because he is also mentioned in our syllabus, and the example of John Donne will suffice, I think. So he was born in a Catholic family at the time when England had established its own church, and there was a shifting relationship between the Catholics and the Anglicans, and the Anglicans and the Protestant, according to the change of the ruler. So during Elizabethan period, Queen Elizabeth just maintained a distance from both these extremes, and she chose the middle path. But still, there are a circle in England that, though was willing to accept certain traits of Catholicism, but they were very vocal about their Protestant inclination. And the result was that, due to that religious prejudice, John Donne had to leave his study halfway in Cambridge University. So we can say this religious stress must have influenced his poetic mindset, his outlook. And in the slightly later period, he was converted to Anglicanism. So the religious tension, a tension as to which one is the true Christianity, true religion, is repeatedly found in the religious poems of John Donne. So we can attribute this quality, this tension, to the personal life, personal experiences of John Donne. Again, we can take another incident out of his life. He impractically married the relative of his employer, and he had to face the result. At that time, though the advent of press had much democratized learning, the writers, the poets were still looking for patronages. So at that time, just creating that kind of unfavorable condition for himself by John Donne is proved unfortunate for him, and he had to face the result. He just lived a part of his life in a miserable condition, and finally he had to change to Anglicanism. So all these things can be traced in his poems. His approach towards women is something to do with his early years, because in his elegies, which were written during his earliest phase of life, there were a kind of cynicism about women, and at least that gradually matured into a different kind of expression about true love, a love for uh, love as a medium to achieve the final salvation. All these things were there, but still this kind of tension was also there. And that is why, if someone poetic sensibility is shaped in such circumstances, obviously there may be difference in his expression. So all these things are there in the poems of John Donne, and he did not find the musical lyrical expression of the period suitable to his purpose, and that is why he deviated a little. But he did not completely break away with the tradition, because we have just talked about the tradition passed through the successors of Spenser, and we talked about the didactic element in the in the poetry of the period. We can also find that there were certain uh, writers who gradually turned their didactic poetry into a satire. And again, this exchange was the result of the influence of Italy. So, primarily Martial. And before him, Horace and Juvenal. This was a kind of, Horace wrote a kind of polished satire, while Juvenal preferred a rough kind of satiric writing. He believed in directly abusing the individuals, and the most of the Elizabethan satirists followed him. Some of them just followed Horatian qualities, Horatian model, and in that course they also followed Martial, and the result was that epigram. Epigram in England was of two kinds. A kind of miniature satire, you can say, and a kind of commemorative epigrams. Ben Jonson was the master of this kind of epigrams, and Harrington, Sir John Harrington and Sir John Davies were the masters of this kind of epigrams that were inspired by Martial. But John Donne followed this kind of writing style that was followed by Juvenal, means he used very abusive and rough kind of expression to just express his ideas, the follies of the time, about the follies of the time. So it was all there: satiric writing, cynicism, and a quest for true religion. Everything was there. The only thing that changed in the hands of Donne was the way of expression. So we cannot say that he entirely broke away with Elizabethan tradition and Jacobean tradition. We can only say that his individuality enabled him to create a separate space for himself as a poet, and he used that space to create a kind of influence and followers for himself in the period to follow. So this was all about metaphysical poetry. I hope you have understood this lecture well, and if there is any confusion, you can get back to me in my comment box, and so I'll be there for you. Thank you. Enjoy your study.